Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. So I'm a PR guy. I'm also a marketer, I suppose, but for the last 5 years, I've been primarily living in the communications world. So today I'm psyched to dig into the world of communications with someone who has pretty much seen it all. From beginnings as an engineer to a long career in communications for a variety of industries, my guest has also given back to the profession with over 2 decades of dedication to the Public Relations Society of America. He's been a CCO, a CMO, an entrepreneur, and now is the founder, CEO, and chief content officer of Bay Area consultancy Redphlag. Let's get right into it with the one and only Gerry Corbett. Gerry, was that pretty accurate? Does that sum you up pretty well?
Dan, you did a great job, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be on the Dan Nessel Show, that's for sure.
Yep, and it's Nessel like wrestle, but that's okay. We've got...
that's right.
No, it's fine. I love it when people mispronounce my name because it gives me a chance to, first of all, say it's Nessel like wrestle, which you don't say that often. And also because, just this first, actually, it's amazing. This is the first time this story has come up in the podcast. But when I was younger, people would say Nestle, right? And especially when I was in college, they say Nestle. I'm like, yeah, that's right, Nestle. And, like the chocolate. Oh, yeah, just like the chocolate. Is good old Uncle Gustav, had amassed a fortune in Switzerland. And and it was sadly one of his brothers happens to be my grandfather. And they didn't get along, caused a rift in the family and sent us penniless to North America. And so I'm absolutely in no way, shape, or form related to the chocolate fortune. All a lie, of course. It's not a lie that I'm not related, but, Nessel is actually a made-up manufactured name. My grandfather changed it because it used to be a much longer name. Neselowitz, I think, is the closest approximation. It's probably a longer Russian name before that. But so when you mispronounce it, it doesn't really, it doesn't really matter that much. But yeah, I like telling that story. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Let me admit to a fault. Yesterday I was reading an article about Nestle water.
Oh.
And I think LA has sent them a bill and is trying to get them remove their right to get water from some aqueduct near LA or something like that. So my bad.
It's on your mind. No, top of mind. That's fine. It's cool.
Nessel,
I'm glad to be here with you, Gerry. Nessel like
wrestle.
I'm glad to be here with you. And also your name Gerry is Gerry with a G. My daughter's name is Gerry with a J, but just Jeri. And my dad's name was Gerry. So
wow,
there's a lot of good convergence of positive karma, I think, right now on this little show I've got going on.
I think so.
It's good to see you. So, hey, I just wanted to start off look, you've been in the industry in PR for a long time, and it's fair to say that you're a leader in the field. And we know a lot of people who mutually friends of ours who are also leaders in the field. Like I was just speaking with Patrice Tanaka the other day. Yeah. And Patrice is obviously, she's been on the show. By the time this airs, her episode will have aired. And she, by the way, says hello. But, she's a legend in the area. Ken Jacobs is a legend around here. All these folks are mutual connections with you. And I think that's one of the ways we got connected was probably through Patrice. And look, I always feel that my network is so solid that whenever I get introduced to somebody through my network, it's always sort of guaranteed pretty much that this person is going to be stellar. And clearly, we're going to find out in the next, roughly hour, but I'm really excited about the things we're going to talk about, especially when it comes to the world of public relations and communications, even technology and how it all kind of fits together. Because you've seen it all and you've been around for a while. So how did it all start for you? Like, how did you get from engineer to PRSA? How did this all happen for you, Gerry?
Well, I grew up in a family of eight kids, and mainly in Philly, with a short stint in San Diego when I was 6 years old, and my dad was working for Convair, which later became a unit of General Dynamics, and he was working on fighters during the war. basically designing the bomb racks. So he actually spent 40 years as a civilian engineer for the Navy. So, I was predisposed to aerospace and engineering. And my high school graduating class was about 1,600 people.
Whoa.
And when you're in something that big, you're just part of the masses. So we never gave too much thought about what we wanted to do in the future, other than 8 kids on the salary of an engineer back in the 60s doesn't get you a whole lot. So we were all on our own.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up applying to Philadelphia Community College. I majored in electrical and engineering, and went for 2 years. I also have a twin brother.
Ooh.
I'm 6 minutes older, and he was always academically better than I. But we both felt like we needed to get out of Dodge in order to grow and do
Right.
something different. So I had actually worked for an Italian dry cleaner during high school, and I ended up buying his 1966 Opel Kadett station wagon. So my twin brother and I just, it was like, I think in May or June of 1970, and we said goodbye to the folks. And we had $100 between us, and we drove to California.
It's a rags to riches story in the making. I'm
Rags to
sensing it.
riches, yeah. So we ended up in temporarily in Gilroy, California, and we both got jobs at the garlic factory in Gilroy. And my job was shoveling garlic off flatbed trailers so it could be moved inside, either garlic powder or dipped in formaldehyde for seed. So I worked the truck duty for, I don't know, a month or so. I got promoted to formaldehyde duty. And
is that a promotion you want, or
no. So I spent about a month dipping and bagging garlic cloves into formaldehyde to preserve them for seed. But in the meantime, my brother and I were both looking for better paying jobs. And I ended up, applying to just a bucket load of companies in Silicon Valley, and also applied for a job, engineering assistant job at NASA. I got the job.
Geez, garlic cloves and dipping in formaldehyde to NASA.
That's right.
That has to represent one of the largest gaps or one of the largest jumps in skilled work.
Yeah, about the only thing that I can link the two is maybe the laminar flow of the formaldehyde, corresponded to the laminar flow of the wind tunnels where I worked,
Mm-hmm.
mainly doing IT duties. My job was basically calibrating instrumentation and writing curve fit programs to take the aerodynamic the raw data into aerodynamic coefficients that told the designers how the plane was performing, or how the rocket was performing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there for 7 years. I went from engineer to scientific programmer, and part of my job was helping NASA to automate the wind tunnels, because we used to record the data on paper tape and run it over to the computer center. So NASA bought these data acquisition units where the data would be automatically transmitted to an IBM 360. So because of the work that I had done on that project, I eventually learned to program. So I was programming in Fortran and PL1 and COBOL and BASIC.
I'll tell you, if I didn't know how this story was going to end, or to bring it to where there is no way that I would connect that with where you ended up going. So I'm really curious. I'm really fascinated to find out how this is going to evolve. Like, what happened?
So I ended up being, becoming a scientific programmer, and I was writing programs in PL1 and Fortran on each of the projects. So probably 40 to 50% of the work that I was doing was on space shuttle design,
Mhm.
and the rest of the time was on commercial aircraft like the 747 and 737, 727, and fighter aircraft like A-10, which was
The
a
Warthog.
yeah, the Warthog. I worked on that project
Wow.
for a while. But in the meantime, because the wind tunnels use so much power, I had to work either the swing shift or the graveyard shift. So because of that, I thought, you know what? Let me go back to school full time,
Hmm.
and I'll major in journalism and public relations, which was my ultimate goal. Because while I was still in high school, I sort of learned a lot more information about various schools that offered public relations degrees, and San Jose State was one of the schools. In fact, I think it has the second oldest PR degree in the country.
San Jose State.
Yeah,
Well, let me ask you then. If this whole time that you're an engineer and taking care of warthogs in air tunnels, uh, or like serious programming that you were doing, you had already decided that that the direction that you really wanted to go back when you were in high school. You already knew that you wanted to be in PR or in
yeah,
communications in some
yeah,
way.
yeah. Because I was always a good writer.
Mm,
English, I always aced English in high school. It was,
yeah.
wasn't it was writing was not an issue for me. It came to me naturally. So I was sort of inclined to look at PR because
The basics.
basic skill is writing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's interesting. And in my career in PR so far and in communications, the 2 decades around or roughly that I've been doing this, the one constant is writing. I mean, that's the one thing that we can always
Yeah,
count on is that if you're not a good writer, you have no business being a PR person. Like, period. There's
that's
almost
right.
no. There's almost. I mean, maybe nowadays I think with other ways that we can express ourselves in words communicatively, like if you're good at audio, if you're good at putting together like verbally saying something very well, maybe. But fundamentally, you really need to be a writer, and recognizing that early in your life probably is I guess it's natural that you went towards communications of some kind. But that's a heck of
Well,
a detour
yeah,
to go to.
and well,
Yeah.
I went into engineering originally because my dad was an engineer,
Hmm.
and my oldest brother was an engineer with Lockheed. And so, I thought, let's try it out. Let's see if it works for me.
Family biz, in
Yeah.
some ways.
So, but because a lot of my work was on the graveyard shift or the swing shift, I went back to college, went to San Jose State, initially majored in journalism and switched to PR in pretty short order. And so from 74 to 77, I went sometimes full time, sometimes part time. It just depended on what kind of test I was working on. The shuttle, I was working 12-hour shifts. It was crazy. And so I got my degree in 77, and Jimmy Carter had just come on board as president. And because of my NASA work, I also had a security clearance, and because of that, I never got drafted. Maybe they thought that the work that I was doing at NASA was equivalent. Who knows? So after I got my degree and Carter came in, I decided that I needed to sort of bridge the gap from engineering to PR, and I decided to become a tech writer. So so I wrote the operating manual for the microprocessor development system, and that was cool. But you know what? Being a tech writer isn't always fun, but it did, sort of make me somewhat of a geek.
It just reminds me, like, even my start in the industry, I didn't get a degree in communications or anything. I was just a good writer, and like, I guess I was a teacher. I was living in Japan, and I was teaching, and I was, doing all kinds of different things. I was then in back office HR, and then working and working doing like Excel sheets for a big consulting firm. And I just had it. I just couldn't do it anymore. I was a people person fundamentally, so I always knew that I could write. So I just decided to start a business as a writer, and that's kind of what started my career in communications. I didn't realize that I was suddenly in PR and comms at the time, but I was, because my first couple of clients actually were, through connections that I made. I ended up working on projects doing like brochures and like some training scripts for technical things. So I was doing brochures for semiconductors, and like I remember trying to write headlines for semiconductor brochures. And oh yeah, and I was getting schooled on it, like, because I was brand new at this, and I was writing these headlines. And the folks that were mentoring me at the time, the great Tom Boatman, who was a guest on my show a while back, he'd say, "Dan, your writing is really solid. You got to get working on those headlines. Let's have a chat about that." And he helped me out to understand a really good, good ways to write headlines. And then he taught me about his whole thing was this. He called it the Aunt Millie conversation, where you have to write as though you're speaking to your 85-year-old Aunt Millie across a table, right, in the kitchen, so that she can understand what you're talking about. So when you're talking about semiconductors to Aunt Millie, what would you say? Right? Not exactly a simple task, you know. But it was the movie scripts, not the movies. Sorry, the training scripts that were the funnest, the funniest thing. And at the time, there was such drudgery, trying to create a training script for a multifunction copier for Toshiba, actually, was what I was doing. And I would write these scripts for which buttons to push and how to how to open and load things. And, we'd have to go to the studio, and they'd have some voice actor doing the voiceover for the training script, like for it to do a recording. And I'd actually have to sit with them like this is really like, let's get the writer in here and fix that line of the script. I'm like, it's a training video. Well, they're paying me. Okay, fine. Yeah. Yeah, but it's funny because that's how I got my start in it too. And it makes sense. Like, there's a lot of need in that area.
Well, it's interesting because you have reminded me of a couple things that I was doing then to sort of help make the bridge. And I had gotten involved with PRSA as a student back in the mid 70s, and ended up meeting, students would be invited to the professional lunches and stuff. So I ended up meeting people, in particular a couple agency folks who needed help with things. So I started writing some magazine articles about technical things, or editing our articles for agencies, and so that allowed me to sort of make connections. And one of the connections ended up putting me in touch with the president of Creamer Dixon Bassford, which was an agency headquartered in Providence, but they had offices in New York and Pittsburgh. And so one day I got a call out of the blue from the president, who was going to be at a conference in Carefree, Arizona. And he said, "We'll fly you there. Come and talk to me. We might have, we might need you." So I took a flyer on it and flew to Arizona, met with the guy, and next thing I know, I was packing up my stuff, heading to Providence in like 19 late 79, early 80 or something. So I ended up program manager at Greenwood Dixon Bassford, where I was managing a group of sort of technical writers who were working on, various accounts from technology companies along Route 128 up in Massachusetts. I remember writing a ton of technical articles on everything from Resona plastics machinery to the use of cryogenic vacuum pumps in semiconductor process.
Folks, this is real, by the way. This is what we do in PR, and especially early days, we write about cryogenic pumps and things like you'd never in a million years know that you need that there's like careers built on this, and that's just it's fascinating because I think back to my early days and the kind of work that I was doing. One thing I think, especially for some of the listeners out there who are early in their careers or who are considering a career in public relations or in communications is something you said about basically making connections and doing these jobs for agencies. What a great way even now to get into the field because agencies need the spillover work. They have a lot of spillover work. They need cost effective, talented people to do writing or to do graphic design or whatever the part of the project that you're specialized in. So that's a constant I think through all these years, Jerry. That's
Oh yeah,
something
yeah.
that we all have to do.
And the operative word that you just used was cost effective. You know,
Yeah.
if you're a good writer, even if you're new to the field, you should be able to land something pretty quickly. It may not pay what you want, but you know, agencies try to get the cheapest person they can to do the most complex work that they need to do. I mean, I remember cranking out case histories about marking equipment from a company up in New Hampshire called Markham, Marken, and they sold their equipment for everything from marking semiconductors to labeling underwear. I mean, it was just crazy, boring stuff.
And we've all been there. Well, at least many of us have. And by the way, like this is not going to be on video for listeners, but I'm like, I'm looking at you, Jerry, and I'm looking at your face as you're talking about some of these projects, and I'm thinking, that's exactly how I felt when I was writing about, you know, some like some semiconductor back in Japan, or you know, those kinds of little projects that at the time. Yeah, I did a lot of work with recruitment firms too because I have a background in recruiting. And how many different ways can you describe the candidate acquisition process? Surprisingly many, actually. It turns out there's a lot of ways you can because you need to. But these are the jobs you take before you get into
That's
a
right.
real kind of track. I think
Yeah.
in an agency or in a or in house. Yeah. So your career progressed. You went from agency and then you end up in house somewhere.
One day I got a phone call from a recruiter in Chicago, and I'm not sure where he came across me, but International Harvester was looking for somebody that understood technology
Mhm.
because they had Brooks McCormick, the grandson of uh, Cyrus McCormick, was CEO at the time, or chair at the time, and he had hired this guy named Bob Potter, who was PhD in physics, to set up a science and technology center for Harvester because they were long branded as an old line farm equipment company,
Mhm.
and Brooks wanted to bring Harvester into the 20th century with technology and stuff. So this guy, Dr. Potter, insisted that he had to have somebody on the corporate communications staff that understood what a semiconductor was, you know. So I interviewed, and the guy I interviewed with the corporate communications folks, and Dr. Potter. He gave me a technology test, and I passed it. So boom, I was in.
Yeah, it's funny because one of the questions that I had as you were speaking earlier is, well, so how did you leverage your time at NASA in communications in-house? And there it is. Like that's even just the first example. You know, you passed that tech test to get a comms job. It's pretty crazy.
Well, that's true. And the other thing I left out was because I was majoring in PR while at NASA, and I was doing engineering, I joined the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics.
Hmm.
And so I became the newsletter editor for the
Yep.
Bay Area chapter. So I wrote the newsletter, and I still have copies of it somewhere. But so as a consequence, I've been in AIAA as long as I've been in PRSA.
That's amazing. Are you the only dual member? You might be the only person who's in both.
Oh yeah, I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. Yeah. But so Harvester was really an interesting gig
Mhm.
in the sense that I got pulled in on technology and trying to help them communicate what their vision was from a technology point of view. And I was on a team that helped introduce the most technologically advanced tractors, farm tractors, and they were articulated. They used semiconductor technology to automate some of the equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of fun. Going out to the factory in Peoria, I learned a lot as well about ag technology as well. I became Potter's speech writer, so I always had to, he would address these big farm equipment conferences, and I would have to write speeches for him about technology stuff. So that was kind of fun.
You're reminding me again of just stuff that I've done in my career as well, and how I think a lot of the people I've met over my time, and especially now that I'm a little more senior in the industry, have had either 0 or very unrelated, like, experience to whatever they're talking about. So, when you it's such an interesting skill to have, and it's hard to really, I think, market it. And people outside of PR and communications, I don't think, and maybe marketing, they really don't know what this means, but you can be dropped in as a communicator into any industry and suddenly become, and you have to become at least, if not the subject matter expert, you have to be able to understand what the SMEs are saying to a degree. So you have to learn so much about the industry and in a short time. So I learned a whole lot about accounting because I was in the accounting field as a communicator for several years. And then I moved into, into PR, into an agency. So I had to learn a bunch of different things, finance and whatnot. And then I found myself working in heavy manufacturing. So like all of a sudden I'm learning about power generation and fuel technologies and the future of hydrogen power. And then I go from rockets, talking about rockets, to toilets because now the company I work for is, basically as a manufacturer of toilets and fixtures and fittings for kitchens and bathrooms and so on. So like, and you know what? It's every single time there's a whole degree of fun and excitement about learning the new field. And then the more times I've done it, the more times I've reinvented myself in some way in that way, the more times I realize, you know what? This is something that's just portable. You can do this for any industry.
That's right. And that's what I preach to students and young professionals. I just the mantra that has always been in my head over the years is, jack of all trades, master of none.
Mhm.
That's basically what a PR professional has to be or has to become if they want to be successful.
Yeah.
The other thing that I learned at Harvester was they were going through financial hell,
Mm.
and they were trying to renegotiate all these loans with their banks, and they'd gotten into severe debt because of a very lengthy strike that they had at all their factories, and they were trying to cut costs. They had brought in a guy by the name of Archie McCardle as CEO. He came out of Xerox. They brought in this guy Warren Hayford as COO. He came out of International Paper, and So they started looking around at how can we cut costs, right? So the head of CorpCom hires H&K to come in
Mhm.
and do an audit of the communication staff. That was like 1 week of hell week
So
because
you
we all.
talk. So you say HK, like Hill and Knowlton.
Yeah,
They hired.
yeah,
So they hired a PR agency to come in and audit the in-house PR staff.
that's right.
There's no conflict of interest there whatsoever, correct?
Of course not. Of course
That's
not.
crazy.
Of course not.
Sorry, we recommend that you fire all your staff immediately and hire an agency to take care of all these problems.
But in the meantime,
Yeah.
the communication staff went from 200 people down to 12.
Yeah.
So my response, I was manager of technology communications, and then I became head of technology communications and internal communications.
Hmm.
So I was working on a lot of stuff that I would sort of guard the door at the bankers meetings. That was fun because the Chicago Sun-Times and the Chicago Trib would always try to sneak in the back door, and it was my job to kind of
You
like
were the
keep
you
them
were the
out.
bouncer.
Yeah, yeah,
They hire the PR guy as the bouncer. That's
yeah.
good. That's funny role too.
So the main point of my story is that what happened was this company called Gould was looking for, again, somebody with a technology background to come on board as manager of PR. And guess who the agency was?
Hill and Knowlton.
Bingo. Yeah. So H&K introduced me to the people at Gould, and I ended up being hired as manager of public relations. And probably 40% of my job was speech writing for the CEO.
Hmm.
And the CEO was a very mercurial character by the name of Bill Ilvasacker, who was famous for building Palm Beach Polo and Country Club.
Okay.
And during my tenure there, Gould originally was just a battery company, started by a guy by the name of Charlie Gould, who made batteries for drain lighting, and they were based in the Twin Cities. Ilvasacker moved them to Chicago and went on a buying binge and became an electronics company.
Hmm.
They were making switch gear and defense equipment like torpedoes and sonar arrays, and oh my god. So Ilvasacker remade the company twice. He took them from batteries to electrical, and then electrical to electronics.
Hmm.
So a lot of my time was just at the typewriter banging out speeches for Wall Street and other groups on what Gould was trying to do to become a second GE.
Hmm.
So it was a fascinating experience, and I was there for 7 years. It was very high pressure in the sense that Ilvasacker was a very demanding CEO, and he was driven by Wall Street mainly, driven by his own nature and personality. He he was also credited with bringing polo to the United States.
Hmm.
So a lot of his cred was built on polo, and he built the Palm Beach Polo Country Club, which was it was a magnificent facility. It's still there,
Yeah.
but he sort of did it on Gould's dime,
Sure.
and he had a series of presidents that he brought in, and the more electronics and computer he got, he decided that he needed a president with different skills. So he brought in a guy from IBM whose job it was to take all these computer related acquisitions and help them start to make money. So he bought a mini computer company. He bought a gallium arsenide semiconductor company. He bought a custom chip company. He bought a bunch of medical companies. Oh my God, the list goes on and on. While I was there, he acquired 63 companies and sold 33.
So your role there, and this is one thing that I'm hearing through, your story here is at each one of these roles that you're taking, like as you move along through your career, you're getting exposure to, you know, the various aspects of public relations and communications that, people first of all rarely get that much exposure, but like you start off doing tech writing and you move into, agency work and you're eventually doing, running a comms team and now here you are doing speech writing and certainly like you talk about the financials sounds like essentially you're doing investor relations, you're doing a lot of crisis probably and a lot of M&A certainly for, for a top executive. These are these don't happen every day for people. Yeah.
And I also had responsibility for the annual report
Mhm.
because I wrote the annual report. And then for the accounting guys, they had me writing the MD&A for the 10Qs and 10Ks.
Yep.
So, I got a lot of experience very quickly, and I sort of liken it to concentrated orange juice as opposed to orange juice, right? Besides all the management turmoil, this guy from IBM sort of eventually got the CEO's number. He figured out what the CEO was doing, and he did a palace coup. There was a board meeting that Bill had at the Polo Club, and he had it at the Polo Club because he wanted to show the directors the new clubhouse and walnut locker room, right? So Jim McDonald gets one look at that and orchestrated a coup
Like there on the spot?
right there on the spot. He got the board to get Ilvasacker to step down as CEO and just become chair, and McDonald as president and CEO. And I still remember getting a phone call at home at night from Bill saying, Gerry, I need to see you in the morning. I've decided to make a transition. I suspected something was going on because there were so many other things that went quirky. Like in the preceding 6 months, Prince Charles and Lady Di got married,
Mhm.
and Bill offered them one of the condos at the Polo Club for a month. But that got turned into that Gould gave a condo to Charles and Lady Di, right? Which was not true. He was
Mhm.
just letting them stay there for a month. So that was a firefight because analysts got wind of it,
Sound
and
like influence peddling or something?
well, they were pissed that Bill was using company assets to
Yeah.
give gifts to the royal couple. So
Well,
so
yeah.
you were, I was on the phone, writing press statements and yada yada yada. So there was always something. There was always something going down. Always something going down. And so anyway, so Bill, I meet with Bill the next morning, and so I wrote a news release and a statement for him, et cetera, et cetera. Then I had to negotiate with the new CEO on the language, and these guys were not talking to each other. So I'm going back and forth between the two of them. So that was crazy.
Wow.
But the story gets even better because after the new CEO came on board, Barron's wanted to come in and do a big piece. So I brought Barron's in. They met with the president or the new CEO, and they wrote this beautiful article about how Jim McDonald was going to save the company, right?
Mhm.
That was on a Sunday that it appeared. That week, the accountants and the auditors found a $130 million problem at one of the defense divisions.
My God.
So there was this big debate about, do we restate? Do we just let it ride and take care of it the next quarter? It was just absolute mess. So the accountants and lawyers decide just to restate and make an announcement. which was my job to do. So Barron's calls up and they're pissed. The reporter felt like he was taken for a ride, and he
Yeah.
said, I want to come in." So I went to the CEO, and he brought the general counsel in. General counsel said, "No way, you're not
Of
doing it."
course.
I spent the next few hours privately with the new CEO, convincing him why we needed to do that, and that he was the new guy on the block, and this was really going to affect his ability to re-engineer and remanage the company.
Hmm.
So the CEO said, "Fine, we'll let him back in. This weekend, you're coming to my house, and we're going to go over everything, and we're going to rehearse absolutely everything." Meantime, the general counsel wasn't happy about me
Yeah.
doing that. And by the way, I had like 5 or 6 different bosses over 7 years. So my final boss was the general counsel. And anyway, so push came to shove. I spent the weekend with him. Barron's came in, and they wrote another great article
Oh.
about how the CEO was surprised, and the problems were because the last CEO wasn't paying attention, yada yada yada. So I survived that battle, and so did the CEO. In the meantime, over the next course of the next year, the CEO is trying to figure out how to save the company, how to turn the company around. And there's so much that I'm omitting
Yeah.
from
Of
this
course. Yeah.
story. But so he ends up negotiating with a joint venture partner in Japan. Hitachi had a little crown jewel called the Copper Foil Division,
Hmm.
and it was a joint venture between Gould and Nippon Mining Company. And Nippon Mining Company is in the same, what do they call it, the Keiretsu with Hitachi.
Yeah.
Okay,
Keiretsu. That's right. Yep.
McDonald talked Nippon Mining into buying Gould because the Copper Foil division was throwing off tons of cash
Hmm.
because they made this ultra thin copper foil for printed circuit boards. And they had a factory in Germany, a factory in Arizona, and a factory in Hitachi City, believe it or not. So I was involved in that transaction. Um,
And that's what brought you over to Hitachi.
yeah. So what
Yeah.
happened was I ended up, Nippon Mining wasn't happy with the CEO because he tried to get a lot of money out of it as he was exiting out the door. So I ended up negotiating the language of his departure, not with Nippon Mining, but with Industrial Bank of Japan,
Wow.
the guy that was in charge. I was put in charge with being the go between McDonald and Nippon Mining through IBJ,
Hmm.
just like I was right in the middle between Illisacker and McDonald.
Yep.
So it was just absolutely crazy.
You're illustrating another important point and another important, I think, kind of thing that makes good communicators indispensable or at least consistently hireable. And that is this kind of role as the intermediary, and, building that bridge and being that bridge. I mean, you've just illustrated decades of survival, like through these different companies that you're working with where, presidents are coming, going there's, and you even said you omitted a lot, but even this palace coup, you survived, you stayed on, after that. And then you have this merger. And then I know that, the next part is you then work for Hitachi for, any number of years. So it's like you've got this whole
Yeah.
survival thing going on.
Well, so what happened was McDonald did nothing for me on his way out, but we all got packages. I didn't get a great package. I think I got a year, and that was it. And here I am in Chicago looking for a job. So I forget how it happened, but I saw that there was this job open with Hitachi, and I sent a resume in and got a phone call to come to New York to interview. And
Wow. So it wasn't because of the M&A. It was just you happened to. I mean, I'm sure that played a role in you getting the job, but
Well, when they checked my background, and of course they knew the story, and the funny thing was that Nippon Mining brought Hitachi in when they were trying to sell the semiconductor divisions.
Mhm.
So Hitachi was advising on how to do that. But I stayed with Gould through the departure of McDonald and the divestiture of all the Defense Department assets that Nippon was not allowed to buy. And also negotiating with the Treasury Department uh, through this organization in Treasury called CFIUS that has to approve all this stuff.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
learned so much, so many other things
Yep.
about that. But so I get the offer from Hitachi, and the rest is history, I suppose.
Yeah.
But at Hitachi, I worked for 5 different CEOs.
Yeah. Well, they rotate in
They
Japan for
do.
sure.
They
Yeah.
yeah,
But you
absolutely.
were there for, I mean, that brings you up to almost, almost the very, last decade or so. I mean, we're almost back to almost up to the advent of red flag in
Yeah,
your career
yeah,
cycle. Yeah.
that's right. But there were so many other things at
Hmm.
Hitachi because they were buying and selling as well.
Yep.
I was I was involved in when Hitachi bought IBM's hard drive business.
Right.
I was involved when Hitachi started the PC business, and there were any number of other actions. I was doing a lot of work in Japan. I also built the first Hitachi's global website while I was there called Hitachi.com, which didn't exist before, and a lot of management changes. I even got involved in the management changes over in Tokyo at HQ because I was the only Gaijin that was connected with the Koho in Japan.
Coho is the public affairs, public
PR,
relations
yeah,
division.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's interesting because once also you're working for a big Japanese mega company. Once you get some trust in the HQ, you've got a lot of. It's not a simple job anymore. There's you can get involved in a lot of different aspects of the company. Um, Sadly, in my case, in my last company, that's not sadly, I shouldn't say that because I had a great experience with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. But you can get involved in all these different things. It's just that it's not like an American company where you suddenly get these big bonuses and these great big opportunities to become a CCO or be a VP or jump up. There's not a lot of opportunity for growth and for career change or for promotion in a lot of
exactly,
those companies,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
It's a structural issue. It has nothing to do with you not being a Japanese person or not being at HQ. It's really about the structure isn't made for that. So, it was frustrating to me a little bit after a
Oh,
time.
I've been there, done that, and sort of my tenure at Hitachi sort of came to a slow end as they divested stuff. They got out of the hard drive business. They got out of the consumer electronics business.
Were you there when they dumped power? When they got rid of the power business?
No, but I was there to introduce Hitachi, well, to help launch Hitachi's proton beam business,
Mhm.
which is based on power, but it was medical.
Right.
It's where they use proton beams to eradicate cancer tumors.
Well, look, there's a lot happening here. I mean, you've taken us through quite a few decades of your PR career, and I wanted to ask you really. You started talking about building websites, right? You started off
Yeah,
doing, writing newsletters for an engineering society, engineering association, and and then doing tech writing, gradually kind of moving into, speech writing and all kinds of financial communications and so on. And I'm sure you mentioned typewriters. I mean, you're doing whatever the tools are of the time. And now here you're writing, doing websites. the evolution of the industry, of the tools that have been available to you. I mean, you've seen
Yeah.
more than look, I'm a Gen Xer and I've seen the change from analog to digital for sure. But in my grown up working career, it's been primarily like, especially once I started to get into my, let's call it, my post teaching and like my business career, and I'm doing scare quotes for business, but you know, it was started to really head into the digital zone, and then it was really once I got into marketing and writing and stuff, it was almost all digital by that point. I mean, it was a hybrid, but digital was the way to go. Whereas, so I've seen the evolution, but you've lived the evolution, right? And now here you are at Red Flag. So, let's skip forward a little bit. So here you are at Red Flag. You have your own company. You're the CEO and founder. I mean, clearly you've embraced technology. We met through connections on LinkedIn, and we're doing everything digitally now, of course. And you're a big proponent of a lot of the digital and kind of cutting edge communication platforms that are out there now. So where do you find yourself now? Let's talk about a little bit where you are with Red Flag and what you're seeing happening now in the industry, um, and as things are developing, and where do you think it's going? So kind of pack. It's a big question, but
Going back to National Semiconductor, where everybody in the writing group was writing on yellow pads. They were writing their documentation on yellow pads. I said, guys, I'm going to write this thing using the text editor of the microprocessor development system. And they went, what? I said, yeah, it's right there. I got to write about how to use it, and I'm just going to use this to write it. So that was a big wake up call to them. But it was sort of a wake up call to me in terms of, you know, go with what you got, use what is at hand. So every job that I've ever had, I've always automated whatever I could based on the tools that I had. You know, beginning when I was at Creamer Dixon Bassford, I ended up getting involved with the Dow Jones News Retrieval System, and for the next 8 years, I was a beta tester when when they went from the teletype machine to disk-based system on IBM PCs.
mhm,
So I was beta testing this news retrieval system for them. I didn't get paid or anything, but I got
yeah.
free software and a discount on the service. So everything I've ever done sort of involved that kind of methodology, and even up through my time at Hitachi. I, I I had an agency, and we created this is back in the late not 90s. We created a campaign called True Stories,
Mhm.
and True Stories was sort of a TV commercial, but we used digital media, web, to tell these stories in somewhat of a long form.
Mhm.
And
Ahead of your time, like really
yeah,
ahead of your time.
I think we were the first ones, and BMW came behind us in pretty quick fashion. But being in the process of developing a website and using technology to do it, that sort of led me to automating customer service for Hitachi. And I ended up building part of the website to be global customer service. Hitachi makes a gazillion different products. And so we had a website where a customer could write in and, you know, say what they needed or what they wanted. And then I was put in charge of it because they were getting tired of getting letters to the CEO over in Tokyo. So that function was sort of managed out of the US.
It's not surprising. Even now, the digital kind of centers of excellence for a lot of companies are not where the headquarters of those companies are.
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah.
it's where the talent is, and it's where the capabilities are, and also, frankly, with privacy laws being what they are, it being so different countries where you had to choose to house your data. Although now it's kind of starting to even out a lot more, but where you choose to base your website or your data where it's living is also critically important for that from that standpoint. So it's always been hard for Japanese companies to, I think, keep everything in Japan on the tech side, certainly on the
Yeah.
digital side.
Yeah.
It's been hard for them, but
So
anyway, yeah.
also at Hitachi, I created an internal global news service that went out globally, went to all the subsidiaries, all the presidents of all the subs, and we did it every morning. It was called Hitachi Morning News Briefs, and we
Mhm.
do it early in the morning, write up everything going on in the news about the company, whatever, and it would get
Yeah.
broadcasted every morning through initially through email and then through the internal web.
Internet.
Right.
Mhm. Goodness. Again, you're sort of leading the way here. I mean, these are things that were just kind of, cutting edge at the time. And even still, I think a lot of companies still don't get the whole internal comms thing. That's a whole nother story.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
I think so too. I think I've noticed in my experience, I never so I got into it a little bit in January, February time. And I was trying to find out ways that I could really kind of have meaningful conversations, be part of meaningful conversations, but also host a room or two to talk about things that are important to me. But I didn't want to do it alone because, frankly, I work better with others. But also, I just, you have to have people to get people. So you have to have a certain
Yeah.
number of followers to be able to, get it out there. But I also wasn't sure that I could hold a room for an hour just by myself. I didn't want to do that. So I was looking around, and I teamed up with a friend of mine to do a couple of sessions for global communications, and those turned out to be really great. And we'll probably revisit that at some point soon. But once when I honed in on something that was professionally meaningful, it worked. But when I was just kind of bouncing around and saying, okay, here are people who are talking about like those meta conversations. How like you're on Clubhouse, here's something about how to do well on Clubhouse,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And those are always jammed, and you have the same people moderating and these great experts. And they, how could they be experts? They've been on the platform for 3 months. It doesn't, it's not exactly
Exactly.
clear to me. But then you'd get on there, and there'd be these people who, across various platforms, especially in social media, are social media famous, right? Like just
Yeah.
big names on LinkedIn and big names on Twitter. If you follow these people,
Yeah.
right? If you're a
Yeah.
marketer and a communicator, and then they'd have these rooms on Clubhouse, and of course, 2,000, 3,000 people show up. You'd raise your hand, and because I know this guy, right? So I know quite a few of these people.
Yeah.
I've met them at conferences. They're cool people. I love hanging out with them. I raise I'm there, and they're like, oh, Dan, come up on the stage. So I go up on the stage, and I'm waiting like 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes. Like, how long do I have to wait in the queue before I get my... And then I realized that I'm waiting for a chance to talk for the sake of talking. And I was like, this isn't right. I
Exactly
can't do
right.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
This,
Yeah.
it's not me. I mean, some people it's cool. I just couldn't do it. So I learned that it's fine. It's totally polite to just, say, just bail out, step away and say, hey, I can't do it right now. So that was fine. But, every once in a while I check back in, and I have some great friends who are doing good work and holding great rooms in Clubhouse, but I don't have the patience. It takes a lot of time to really get into it. But look, like these great platforms that are out there, the technology that's out there, including podcasts, including Clubhouse, and the new ones that are coming up. I think as communicators, we have to be on top of it, right? I mean, if we want to stay relevant, it's very hard. My biggest projects that I'm working on and that I worked on in my last company, work on in my new company, is this idea of technology and communications, comtech, right? I mean, some
Yeah.
people call it comtech, some people call it comstech, but it's basically, I don't want to call it comtech anymore. I just want to call it communications because
Yeah.
frankly, that's what it has to be. It's about the disciplines of the marketing stack, of the technology behind measurement and, and customer acquisition and knowing your audience and catering to content for them and serving the content in the right way, and all those good things packaged up together, but for communicators and for what we do and for the audiences we want to reach. And that is definitely where I see the future of comms going more and more and more and more. And as new platforms come up, we have to figure out how to integrate those into that comm tech ecosystem.
You know what? This is the perfect segue to where I was going. And that in the future, being adept at all these platforms and being able to ascertain which ones are most important to your audiences is where things are going, right?
Yep.
If you don't understand the platforms, you don't know how they work, you're not going to be able to well represent your company or your clients in terms of giving them the best bang for buck, right? I mean, if a company comes to me and says, hey, this is where I want to go, tell me how best to get there, how most efficiently, effectively, and cost effectively to get there. So as a professional, I need to analyze everything, all the platforms, old and new, and ones that haven't even been invented yet. You need to have a mindset to explore everything.
I couldn't agree more. And two things, like you said, two words there that I think a lot of people overlook when they think about, getting in, becoming digital professionals, or, even especially among the younger PR, professionals who are like, the young millennials and Gen Zers who really were never analog, the digital natives, right?
Right.
Like they're digital to begin with. So it's not like, hey, you need to be digital, because they are. It's the two words that you said that are critically important: ascertaining importance. Ascertaining importance. And I'm so glad you said that, because you rarely hear that. You hear people say, well, you got to know what the platforms are, and you got to get people on this, and you have to know you have to know. But if you really want to add value, you have to know, and you have to ascertain importance, because you have to be able to stand in a room, or sit in a room, or on a Zoom, or wherever it is, and tell your boss, your coworkers, your client, whoever it is, Clubhouse isn't for you, man. It's not.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Or you need to be on Facebook, whatever, as much as, oh, I hate Facebook. No, you need to be there for these reasons. And the only way you can do that is if you can ascertain the importance. There's so much, I think, to take away from this whole conversation. I'm telling you, man, ascertaining importance, understanding the end, what the end goal is. If everybody in PR would know this from the get go, our industry would just explode. I think we'd be much more accepted and more valuable to the C-suites in the various companies that we're working for, and take our rightful place as strategic partners to organizations.
Spot
So,
on.
you
Spot
know,
on.
look, man, and you've lived that. You're a representative of that. I know we're really, this has gone a little long, but I don't mind. I think it's been a great
Sorry about that.
conversation. But no, it's fine. Jerry, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Let's wrap this up. I just want to let people know that they can find you on LinkedIn if you look for Gerard Corbett. And we've been saying Jerry the whole time, but it's Gerard, Gerard Corbett. His name will be spelled properly in the episode title. Also, redphlag.com, REDPHLAG. And it's PHLAG, yeah?
Yeah. Or just Google me.
Or Google Gerard Corbett. Yeah.
Everything is there.
Yeah.
Everything is there.
Jerry, you are an open book. So you've been in comms as long as you have, and embracing digital. You have a big digital footprint, big digital impact. We didn't even get into the impact that you've had in the PRSA and the Public Relations Society of America, where you are a fellow. And let's save that for another conversation.
Sure.
I've really enjoyed this, Jerry, and I know that my listeners will too. Any last words before we cut it down?
My only last words are you and I have been on parallel paths lo these many years, and I think we both intrinsically understand what PR is all about and what PR professionals ought to be, and that's sort of the best part. is, being able to discuss with someone sort of the essential nature of what we do.
Yeah. Well, I consider that extremely high praise, and I take it with ultimate gratitude coming from Gerry. And I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation offline on another show, maybe, but definitely in our friendship as it evolves, I'm sure, over the next however many years. It's been a real pleasure. And I want to thank you for coming to the show.
And I want to thank you for having me. And I want to thank Patrice Tanaka
Oh, yeah,
for
absolutely.
introducing us.
Yay, Patrice.
Much
Thanks.
appreciated.
All right. Thanks, Gerry.
All right, Dan. Take care, buddy.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the podcast player of your choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks for listening.